The arrival of the Terran Federation. The Chamberlain's voice echoed throughout the Grand Hall, causing the vast chamber to fall into a hush. Representatives of the Galactic Confederacy filled the seats, the echoes of their distant species evident in their varied forms and attire. Some had scales, some had fur, and others appeared as wisps of energy, but they all shared one thing in common, an undeniable curiosity about the newcomers. The Terran Federation, humanity, had finally made its mark on the galactic stage, and the time had come to formalize their membership in the Confederacy. As the human delegation stood at attention, the sound of their footsteps on the marble floor reverberated through the hall. The humans were a curious bunch, so full of potential and power, yet tempered by a strange humility. Their reputation had spread across the stars, though it was a reputation met with mixed feelings. The Rathani, a towering species of calculating and methodical traders, regarded humanity with suspicion. The Zarek, a stoic warrior race, saw humanity's reckless creativity as a liability. And yet there was something about these humans that set them apart, something that neither fear nor admiration could define. The Chamberlain, an ancient being from a forgotten species who had witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations, raised a single clawed hand, signaling the beginning of what would become a historic day. "I hereby announce," his voice boomed, "that the Terran Federation is now a formally recognized member of the Galactic Confederacy. Let this moment mark the dawn of a new era, one where we learn from each other and grow together." The air in the room thickened with the sound of applause, not only from the representatives, but also from the holographic audience of millions watching from countless planets. The humans stood tall, their faces a mix of pride and tension. Fully aware that this moment was just the beginning of what could be a tumultuous journey, their arrival on the galactic stage had not been smooth. They had fought tooth and nail to be accepted into the Confederacy, their presence both a promise and a threat to the established order. Just as the applause was reaching its peak, a figure from the Asarani delegation, known for their pointed ears and sharp intellect, stood up. His name was Krantok, an ambassador who had long been wary of humanity's unyielding drive. His people, an ancient race of diplomats, believed in the power of knowledge and order. Krantok's gaze fixed upon the human delegation with calculated intensity as he addressed the Chamberlain. "I have a matter of utmost importance to bring to this council," Krantok's voice rang out. "A matter that casts a shadow upon this otherwise historic occasion. Humanity, despite their claims of cooperation and unity, have failed to adhere to the most basic of galactic rules. Rule number 883, the Non-Strategic Disclosure Agreement, has been blatantly violated." A collective murmur of confusion passed through the room. Many of the alien delegates exchanged glances, unsure of what this could mean for their interactions with the humans. The Non-Strategic Disclosure Agreement was a key principle in the Confederacy, one that ensured no member race shared critical military or infrastructural secrets with other species without the Council's consent. This law had been put in place to maintain peace and order among the diverse races of the Confederacy. The idea that humanity had broken this rule was an accusation that sent ripples through the assembly. The Chamberlain's eyes narrowed, his long antennae twitching slightly as he processed the weight of Krantok's words. "This is a grave accusation, Ambassador Krantok. What evidence do you have to support such a claim?" "I have evidence," Krantok replied, his voice now carrying the hint of triumph, "and I am prepared to present it. But before I do, I must ask the Terran delegation, do you deny the existence of your so-called dark sites?" The human delegation shifted uneasily. Fred, the lead ambassador, adjusted his tie and nervously rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture that had become a subtle hallmark of his anxiety. Beside him, Amari, a seasoned diplomat with a no-nonsense attitude, gave him a quick glance, urging him to stay calm. Fred stood up slowly, his gaze locking with Krantok's. "I don't deny the existence of these sites," Fred began, his voice steady but filled with the weight of the situation. "However, I believe that what you and others are calling violations is a misunderstanding. These sites are not a threat to you, and they are certainly not the kind of information that the Confederacy needs to be worried about." The room was quiet, and all eyes were now on Fred, his word tongue in the air, a challenge wrapped in a question. Crantock's lips twitched in a slight smile, sensing an opportunity to further press his case. "Then explain to us, Ambassador, what these dark sites are. What possible reason could you have to conceal information that the Council should know? And why, may I ask, are entire planets being quarantined if there is nothing of consequence there?" Crantock's voice was sharp, cutting through the tension like a blade. Fred paused for a moment, his fingers tapping on the podium as he collected his thoughts. It was clear this was no simple matter. He knew the truth of what lay behind the quarantine zones, secrets that the Terran Federation had fought to protect, even if it meant alienating the rest of the galaxy. "I will explain," Fred said finally, his voice firm, "but you may not like the answers." As he spoke, he motioned to a display screen that flickered to life behind him. A map of several planets appeared, each marked with a red symbol. These were the dark sites, the quarantined worlds, each one holding its own dark and dangerous secrets. Fred's gaze swept over the map, and he took a deep breath before continuing. "The first dark site I'll speak of is Rakandos 3, a forested planet, filled with lush vegetation and strange, aggressive wildlife. But there's more to it than that. The Fey Woods, an area on the planet, is where the danger truly lies. It's not just dangerous because of the flora and fauna. It's dangerous because of what lies hidden within." Fred's voice dropped to a hushed tone, and even the most battle-hardened representatives leaned in closer to hear. This planet, like several others, was once the domain of an ancient precursor race. They dabbled in the forbidden, meddling with forces beyond our comprehension. Forces that humanity is still struggling to contain. A hushed murmur spread through the room. "What kind of forces?" asked the Chamberlain, his voice low with concern. Fred turned to face the chamber, his eyes glinting with a mixture of fear and determination. "I can't give you all the answers, but I can tell you this. We've lost military personnel to these forces. Entire teams have disappeared, only to reappear as something else. They are not alive, but they are not dead either. They become these walking skeletons, controlled by something we don't fully understand." A few delegates gasped, and the room's atmosphere shifted from curiosity to apprehension. Crantock's smug expression faltered slightly. He was not expecting this level of detail. "I don't expect you to believe me," Fred said quietly. "But these dark sites aren't just strategic. These places are a danger to all of us. The quarantine zones are there for a reason. We're not trying to hide anything from the Council. We're trying to protect you from something we don't yet know how to fight." The chamber remained silent for a long moment. The implications of Fred's words were clear. Humanity wasn't just hiding military secrets. They were protecting the galaxy from forces far worse than anything anyone had ever encountered. The question now was, would the Council understand the gravity of the situation, or would they see humanity's actions as a threat? The dark sites, unraveling the mystery. The silence in the hall was thick, like the air just before a storm. Fred stood in front of the chamber, his expression solemn and unwavering. The room was still filled with the aftershock of his words. Walking skeletons, ancient precursor forces, and the cryptic dangers hidden within the quarantine dark sites. The delegates exchanged uneasy glances, struggling to process what they had just heard. For many, the idea of a species capable of raising the dead, or worse, controlling them, seemed almost laughable. But humanity's own ambassador had just delivered the information with a sincerity that no one could ignore. The weight of the revelation was now pressing down on them, and they could no longer pretend these dark sites were simply rumors or tales of fiction. Chamberlain cleared his throat, his ancient voice breaking the tense silence. "Ambassador Fred, what you are claiming is beyond our understanding. Walking dead, invisible forces, and the powers of a precursor civilization. These are not concepts that we are accustomed to hearing about. You speak of unimaginable forces. But why should the Confederacy concern itself with the dark sites if they are so dangerous? Is humanity unable to deal with them on its own? Fred's eyes flicked over to the display behind him, which was still showing the red-marked planets. He could sense the skepticism in the room. This was a crucial moment, one where he needed to convince the Council that humanity was not hiding something for selfish gain, but was, in fact, trying to protect the galaxy from a far greater danger. The quarantine zones are there for a reason, he said slowly, his tone heavy with the weight of responsibility. We're not hiding these sites out of arrogance or fear. We are trying to protect you. The precursors were not just a curious race. They were a deeply disturbed one, and their experiments with forbidden technologies have left scars across the galaxy. The dark sites are a result of their reckless meddling. A low murmur of concern rippled through the room. The concept of the precursors was known to many of the more ancient races of the Confederacy, but most had assumed that whatever dangers the precursors left behind had been neutralized long ago. To hear that the Terran Federation was still facing the consequences of their ancient hubris was troubling. Fred continued, his voice steady but urgent. These sites aren't just abandoned ruins or ancient relics. They are active, dangerous areas, still haunted by the consequences of the precursors' mistakes. Humanity is doing everything it can to contain these anomalies, but we are not equipped to handle them alone. From the corner of the room, Krantok spoke up, his voice laced with disbelief. But why go to such extreme lengths to quarantine entire planets? Why keep such important information hidden from us? What is it you're not telling us, Ambassador Fred? If these sites are so dangerous, surely the Confederacy has the resources to help you, but you've kept us in the dark. Fred met Krantok's gaze, his expression unyielding. We are not trying to hide anything from you, Ambassador, he replied, his voice cool and controlled. In fact, the only reason we're even speaking about this in the open is because we need your help. If we're going to face these threats, we need allies who understand the gravity of the situation. Chamberlain's large eyes narrowed, his antennae twitching thoughtfully. If the stakes are as high as you say, then we cannot remain passive, he said, his voice deep with the weight of authority. Tell us more, Ambassador. We must understand exactly what you are dealing with. Fred nodded, grateful for the opportunity to provide more clarity. Let me take you through one of the most dangerous of the dark sites. It's a planet known as Rakandos III, a world covered in dense forests, teeming with alien flora and fauna. But there's one area on the planet, the Fey Woods, that must be avoided at all costs. As Fred spoke, another holographic display flickered into life, showing the lush green expanse of Rakandos III. The footage zoomed in, revealing the shadowy trees of the Fey Woods, their branches twisting like gnarled fingers against the sky. Within the Fey Woods, the laws of nature don't seem to apply. Fred continued. There are reports of strange entities, creatures that cannot be fully understood, but whose presence leaves a lasting mark. Soldiers have vanished, and not just physically. They return, changed, stripped of their flesh, their bones reanimated. They become something else entirely, something that hunts its own kind. A collective gasp rippled through the delegates. The idea of a planet where the dead could rise and take control of the living was beyond anything they had ever imagined. Fred paused, allowing the weight of his words to sink in. I've seen the reports, Fred said quietly. Soldiers who entered the Fey Woods only to vanish without a trace, only to return as walking skeletons, devoid of life, but filled with an unnatural purpose. It's not just a threat to humanity. It's a threat to everyone. These entities don't just target humans. They could target any species, and we don't fully understand how or why they do this. It's a legacy of the precursors' experiments. Krantok leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. So what are you saying, Fred? You want us to take your word for it. You claim that this is an ancient curse, a consequence of some long-dead race's foolishness, but you have no way to stop it. What will we gain by cooperating with you? What do you want from the Confederacy? Fred exhaled slowly, choosing his words carefully. What I want is simple. We need your cooperation in securing the quarantines. Humanity can't deal with these dark sites on our own. We have the will to survive, but we are stretched thin. These anomalies are growing, spreading across the galaxy. If we don't contain them, they will spread far beyond the quarantines, threatening everything. A moment of silence passed as the Chamberlain turned toward the other delegates, his gaze thoughtful. The reality of the situation had begun to set in. If these dark sites were as dangerous as Fred claimed, they could potentially tear apart the stability of the entire galaxy. The Confederacy could not afford to ignore this threat, no matter how strange or unfathomable it seemed. We must consider what is at stake, Chamberlain said at last, his voice calm but firm. These are not just isolated incidents. The precursors, despite their long disappearance, may still have the power to influence the present. If the Terran Federation is correct, and these anomalies are growing, then the Confederacy must act. Fred's expression softened, his face reflecting the tiredness of someone who had carried this burden for far too long. I'm glad you understand. The quarantines are not an overreaction. They're a necessary step in preserving not only humanity but all life in this galaxy. Another delegate, a being from the aquatic species of Ulthar, raised a tentacle in the air, signaling for attention. But what about the others? These sites, how do we know they are contained? Are there other species affected? Should we be concerned about the safety of our people? Fred looked over at the Ulthar delegate, nodding gravely. These dark sites are a galaxy-wide issue. We've identified a few major sites, but there are likely others we haven't discovered yet. Humanity has sent teams to explore these places, but so far, we've only encountered more questions than answers. The entities within these sites are not bound by any known rules. They break the very fabric of reality. That's why we've imposed the quarantines. We can't risk having these sites exposed to any other races until we fully understand the threat they pose. The room was filled with murmurs as the delegates processed Fred's words. The idea of unknown, reality-breaking entities walking freely within the galaxy was enough to send a chill through even the most seasoned diplomats. Then what is our next step? Chamberlain asked, his voice rising slightly. How do we proceed with this knowledge? What will humanity need from the Confederacy to help contain these threats? Fred took a step forward, his eyes determined. What we need is support, both logistical and strategic. We need to reinforce the quarantines and ensure no one, human, alien, or otherwise, attempts to breach these sites. If we're going to stop this threat, we must do it together. Chamberlain nodded slowly, the weight of the decision hanging in the air. The Confederacy will deliberate on your request, Ambassador Fred. But understand this, if what you say is true, we will have no choice but to act swiftly. The room fell into silence once more, but this time, there was a sense of resolve. The Terran Federation had made its case. The dark sites were real, and the galaxy was now faced with the choice of whether to confront this new, terrifying threat or allow it to fester in the darkness. The secrets of the dark sites, a struggle for survival. The council chamber was unusually quiet after Fred's impassioned speech. The delegates sat in their seats, processing the revelations he had just shared. The concept of the dark sites, planets where the laws of life and death seemed to no longer apply, where reality itself bent under the weight of unseen forces, was a concept too alien for many to fully grasp. The delegates who had seen war and peace in their long lifetimes were now faced with something far more terrifying than the usual conflict. They were faced with the unknown. Fred stood in front of the assembled council, his posture stiff with the weight of what was still to come. He could see the skepticism in their eyes, but also something else, a flicker of curiosity, a spark of worry. The silence in the room was heavy, but Fred knew this was only the beginning. The next steps would determine whether humanity could survive the oncoming storm, or if they would become the next victim of the Precursor's dark legacy. Let me take you deeper into the situation. Fred said, his voice cutting through the silence. He had their attention now, and he intended to make them understand the severity of what humanity was up against. The dark sites aren't just locations of danger. They are an ongoing problem. These places are connected to something ancient, something we don't yet understand. And every time we venture closer, the danger grows. He paused for a moment, and the room seemed to hold its breath. Fred stepped forward, moving toward a large holographic screen behind him, which flickered to life with a new set of images. It was a detailed map of the dark sites scattered throughout the galaxy. Red dots blinked across the screen, each representing a world or sector that had been deemed dangerous and quarantined. The most significant of these sites, Fred continued, is Rakandos 3, but it is not the only one. There are others, scattered across the galaxy, and they are all connected by the ancient and dangerous experiments of the precursors. These sites may seem random, isolated, but they share one thing in common. They all carry the potential to unravel the fabric of reality itself. A holographic map zoomed in on Rakandos 3, its dark forests sprawling across the surface of the planet like an endless sea of green. But there was something unsettling about the way the trees twisted, their branches contorted in unnatural angles. The Fey Woods, the heart of the planet's darkness, appeared as an ominous blotch on the map, a region marked with a warning that sent a chill down the spines of every delegate in the room. This planet, Fred said quietly, has already claimed the lives of several of our best soldiers. The Fey Woods are where the real danger lies. It is a place where the boundaries of reality break down. People enter, and they don't come back. Or worse, they come back changed. Fred's voice faltered slightly as he recalled the reports, the images that haunted him late at night. We have evidence, footage, testimonies that show soldiers entering the Fey Woods, only to vanish without a trace. Those who manage to escape describe a feeling of being hunted, watched by something beyond comprehension. And then there are the things that emerge from the woods. A new video began to play on the holographic screen. The footage was grainy and shaky, but it was unmistakable. A group of soldiers, armed and prepared, ventured into the Fey Woods. They moved cautiously, their footsteps muffled by the thick underbrush. The camera panned across the dense trees, capturing only flickers of movement in the shadows. A figure, a soldier, walked just a little too far from the group. As he reached a clearing, the camera flickered and slowed. A pair of skeletal hands reached out from the darkness, grabbing the soldier by the legs, pulling him into the void with a speed that left no time for a struggle. His screams echoed, but were quickly silenced as the camera's signal was lost. The room was silent as the footage ended. The delegates exchanged uncomfortable glances, trying to process what they had just seen. Some looked away. Others tightened their grips on their seats. The horror of what was happening on Rakandos 3 was undeniable. Fred let the silence hang for a moment before continuing. These things, whatever they are not natural. They are the result of the precursors' dark experiments. They were meddling with forces they couldn't control, and now we are paying the price for their hubris. A voice interrupted Fred's train of thought. A low, gravelly tone coming from the Xeric delegate, a species known for their stoicism and their deep commitment to military discipline. You speak of these things as though they are some kind of weapon. But if they are simply anomalies, why hasn't the Federation done more to neutralize them? Why allow these planets to remain under quarantine for so long? Fred met the Xeric delegate's eyes, his expression hardening. We have tried. Believe me, we've tried. We've sent our best military teams into these areas, only for them to disappear without a trace, or worse, to return, changed. These entities, whatever they are not something we can fight with conventional weapons. It's not just flesh and bone we're dealing with. It's the very fabric of existence itself. These dark sites distort reality. Time and space behave erratically, and anyone who spends too long within these zones begins to lose their sense of what is real. The Xeric delegate crossed his arms, clearly skeptical. And you expect the Confederacy to take your word for this? What evidence do you have that this is more than just a Terran exaggeration? Fred nodded, acknowledging the delegate's concern. I understand your skepticism, but the evidence is there. We have it on file. Footage, testimonies, research that shows how these dark sites operate. They are not just dangerous. They are supernatural in nature. They exist outside the realms of our understanding, and that is why we must keep them contained. Fred gestured toward the screen, which now displayed more footage, this time from another dark site, Reginald I. The planet was barren, its surface cracked and scarred by what appeared to be unnatural forces. The camera focused on a group of soldiers as they moved through the wreckage, weapons drawn. They were in pursuit of something invisible, something that made the air crackle with energy. The footage zoomed in on a humanoid figure, or what appeared to be a humanoid figure. It was wearing a full set of human military armor, but the figure was empty, its shell devoid of any living matter. Instead, the armor moved as though controlled by an invisible force. A soldier from the team opened fire, his rounds pinging off the armor, but the figure remained unscathed, continuing its march with relentless determination. These are the Dark Vikers, Fred said, his voice heavy with regret. Entities capable of possessing and controlling human military gear. They manipulate the dead, using their remains to wage war. We don't fully understand how they work, but we know one thing for certain. They are dangerous, and they are spreading. The footage continued, showing the soldiers in a desperate firefight, fighting not just for survival, but for control over their very minds. They were facing something far beyond their comprehension, an entity that could manipulate not just the body, but the very reality surrounding them. The sky above seemed to bend, and gravity itself appeared to be unstable as rocks and debris began to float into the air. Fred paused the footage, his expression grim. This is what we're up against. This is why we've had to quarantine these worlds. If the Confederacy cannot understand the scale of this threat, if we continue to ignore the growing power of these dark sites, the galaxy itself will be at risk. The room was still. No one spoke. The horror of what was happening across the galaxy was starting to settle in. Humanity had been dealing with these threats for years, fighting against forces they could barely comprehend. But now, it seemed, the rest of the galaxy was about to face the same struggle. What do you propose we do, Ambassador Fred? The question came from the Chamberlain, whose voice was filled with a mix of curiosity and concern. You've shown us the dangers, the horrors that await. But what is our next step? Fred looked up, his eyes filled with determination. The next step is simple. We need to reinforce the quarantines. We need to send more resources to these dark sites, and if possible, join forces with the Confederacy's most powerful species. Only by working together can we hope to understand and contain the threat. Humanity can't do it alone. But with your help, we can stop these dark sites from consuming everything. The room fell into a long, uncomfortable silence. The gravity of Fred's words was clear. If the Confederacy did not act, if they did not stand together, the entire galaxy could fall prey to forces beyond comprehension. The stakes had never been higher.